Let's just admit the fact that we're all fascinated by what we don't understand. Maybe this is the reason why we keep circling round and round the several mysteries that have not yet been explained, and we will probably never be able to solve them. The Area 51. We all know that Area 51 is a highly classified U.S. Air Force facility located within the Nevada Test and Training Range. Now, you might be thinking, what's mysterious about Area 51? First of all, the existence of this military base was confirmed in 2013 when the CIA was obliged to respond to a Freedom of Information Act request. The intense secrecy surrounding Area 51 has sparked several rumors. Many people believe that the government uses this place to house crashed UFOs, conduct lab tests on aliens, research on time travel, meet with aliens, and develop ways to control the weather. Well, one theory also suggests that Area 51 is used for activities related to a shadowy one-world government. The Pollock Sisters. Did you know that nearly 24% of Americans believe in reincarnation? Well, some incidents are so compelling that they force us to believe in reincarnation. For example, the story of the Pollock Sisters. Back in the year 1957, 11-year-old Joanna Pollock and 6-year-old Jacqueline Pollock died in a car accident. The next year, their mother birthed twins, Jennifer and Jillian. These twin sisters later started identifying toys that belonged to their dead sisters. Well, they even pointed out landmarks that only Joanna and Jacqueline knew. On one occasion, the sisters shrieked, "That car is coming to get us!" A psychologist named Dr. Ian Stevenson, who studied reincarnation for years, believed that this story was true. The Dyatlov Pass incident. It was February 1959 when 9 ski hikers died mysteriously in the mountains of what is today known as Russia. On that day, these 9 people set up camp on a slope and prepared for sleep. However, something went catastrophically wrong, and these 9 ski hikers never returned. The abandoned tent was found on February 26th, and many say that the tent was ripped open from the inside. Footprints were found, some wearing socks and some barefoot. 2 bodies were found at the edge of a nearby wood. These bodies were shoeless and were wearing only underwear. Although experts initially thought that hypothermia was the cause of death. However, as other 7 bodies were found over the next few months, the evidence made no sense at all. One body had third-degree burns, the other had been vomiting blood, and the tongue of one body was missing. Moreover, some of the clothing was also found to be radioactive. Theories include drug overdose, gravity anomalies, KGB interference, and of course, UFOs. However, what exactly happened to these 9 people is still unknown. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse. Back in 1900, 3 persons, including Thomas Marshall, James Drackett, and Donald MacArthur, went missing. They were the keepers of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse off the west coast of Scotland. On December 26, 1900, the relief keeper arrived to find that all of the keepers were not present. None of these 3 men ever returned. No bodies were found. Well, theories range from drowning to abduction by a ghost ship or foreign spies. Well, we may never know what actually happened in December of that year. The Overtoun Bridge. Located near Dumbarton, this bridge is known for calling dogs to leap to their death. Many people believe that this bridge is haunted since a local man threw his baby son to his death from this bridge back in 1994. However, you might want to note that around 50 canines have perished by jumping from this bridge since the early 1960s. Scientists have not yet discovered the reason why dogs jump off that bridge. Bobby Dunbar. It was August 23, 1912, when the 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar went on a family fishing trip to Swayze Lake, Louisiana. The family says that Bobby disappeared like magic. After 8 months, Percy and Leslie, Bobby's parents, found their kid. However, this boy was not Bobby Dunbar. The most interesting part is that it was not conclusively determined that this boy wasn't actually Bobby until the year 2004. DNA tests conducted in 2004 found that samples taken from descendants of this boy did not match samples taken from the descendant of the other son of Bobby's parents. It is still not known what happened to the original Bobby. The Tunguska Event. On June 30th, 1908, nearly 770 square miles of forest in Siberia in Russia were flattened. It was reported that an explosion caused this incident. However, there were no witnesses and no other evidence of an explosion. Scientists say that the Tunguska Event was the largest impact event in recorded history. For those who don't know, an impact event means a recordable impact between two astronomical objects, such as the Earth and an asteroid. The shocking part is that no impact crater has ever been found. Walter Collins. This is the story of a young boy named Walter Collins who went missing back in 1982. His mother, Christine Collins, reported in March of that year that her son went missing from their house in LA. The police brought back the son to Collins in August 1982. However, the problem was that this boy wasn't Walter, and Collins knew it. However, the police dismissed her concerns and even accused her of terrible mothering. The real Walter was never found, and no one knows why the police were so invested in covering up the disappearance of Walter that they brought a different boy and even tried to convince Collins that it was Walter. The Mary Celeste. A British-American ship, the Mary Celeste, set sail from New York bound for Genoa in Italy back in November of 1872. The ship was manned by Captain Benjamin Briggs and 7 crew members. Here, it's worth noting that supplies on board were enough for 6 months. And then, on December 4th, 1872, it was found empty and adrift in the Atlantic. The cargo was fully intact except for a lifeboat. Well, no one on board was ever heard from again. Now, you might be thinking that there might have been a pirate attack or an assault by a giant sea monster. However, everything appeared to be in order inside the ship, and the last entry on the daily log of this ship revealed nothing unusual. Who is D.B. Cooper? Lastly, we have the mystery of a man named D.B. Cooper. It was November 24, 1971, when Cooper was on Northwest Airlines Flight 305. It was a 30-minute flight from Portland to Seattle. Other passengers and flight attendants say that this man was in his mid-40s and he was wearing a dark suit, white collared shirt, and black tie. So Cooper took his seat, lit a cigarette, ordered a bourbon and soda, and shortly after takeoff, handed a note to a female flight attendant. She ignored the note, however. Cooper said, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." He demanded $200,000 in negotiable American currency, a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane, and 4 parachutes. Passengers were told that the flight was delayed due to mechanical difficulties. When the plane landed at 5:39 p.m., parachutes and the money was delivered inside the airplane, and Cooper let all passengers and 2 flight attendants leave the plane. The plane took off, and when it landed in Reno, Cooper was not there. No parachute was found, the ransom money was never used, and Cooper was never seen or heard from again. By this point, you may have noticed that some of these mysteries cannot be explained because of a lack of evidence and a loss of evidence. However, some of them might never be solved simply because too much time has passed and we don't have enough information available. And these are all the mysteries that may never be solved we have for you today. Google Earth is like a treasure for people who have a knack for all things mysterious. The modern-day satellite imagery allows its users to freely explore the four corners of the Earth, and it's safe to say that there have been quite a few discoveries that could only be described as bizarre. Switzerland marijuana fields. When you think about Switzerland, you probably picture the Swiss Alps, the iconic Lindt chocolate box, delicious Swiss cheese, and definitely not marijuana fields that measure over 2 acres. How was the Swiss police able to find the exact location of the marijuana fields and arrest everyone involved is something that's straight out of a movie. The police were on a drug ring case, and they were conducting an investigation to bust the ring. The officers suggested using Google Earth to determine the location of the 2 farmers that were associated with the drug operation, and while they did use Google Earth, it wasn't the drug ring that they stumbled upon. They found 2-acre marijuana fields that were surrounded by fields of corn, which is how the fields were kept hidden for this long. As a result, the Swiss police seized a staggering 1.2 tons of hash and arrested 16 suspects, including the 2 farmers. It's believed that in the years that the marijuana fields were growing, the gang sold around 7 tons of marijuana, earning them a total of 3 to 10 million Swiss francs a year. Area 51. The highly classified Area 51 has been shrouded in mystery for years, and it has always been a topic of interest for internet sleuths looking to decipher one of the world's greatest mysteries. In case you haven't heard of it before, Area 51 is an Air Force base located in Nevada, United States, and the operations that happen inside are extremely secret. Covering land that measures over 2.9 acres, it's said that the Area 51 facility was built as a testing and development facility for aircraft. No one is allowed to set foot inside Area 51 except for the workers. It's surrounded by warning signs, is being surveilled 24/7, and there are armed guards available on the premises at all times. And the way that they're secretive about everything that happens inside, and let's not forget to mention the fact that it hasn't been acknowledged by the CIA until 2013, which is 58 years after the facility opened, that's exactly what fuels conspiracy theories all around the world. So what's a better way to explore a secret Air Force base than to search it up on Google Earth? Given the fact that exploring Area 51 through Google Earth is the only way anyone can get close to figuring out what really goes on there, several people have discovered things inside the facility that are quite terrifying and intriguing at the same time. People thought that there were absolutely no entry gates to Area 51 other than the ones that are being guarded all year round. However, it was thanks to Google Earth that secret entrances to the facility were found. In 2020, the YouTube channel Finding UFO shared Google Earth coordinates for the supposedly secret entrances to Area 51 that didn't exist in images from 1998 but appeared in images taken years later. No one knows anything about these secret entrances, but chances are they were probably designed to waste disposal pits for accessibility purposes. Shockingly, this isn't the only Google Earth discovery about Area 51. In September of 2020, a self-titled UFOologist named Scott C. Waring shared a recent finding on satellite imagery. When Waring entered a specific coordinate and used the time-lapse feature, he noticed the appearance of 2 giant robots roaming Area 51. According to the ufologist, the 52 feet tall robots were built by aliens, and they were captured by the military to use them in combat missions. Rotating Island. The time-lapse feature on Google Earth has proven to be a very useful tool when it comes to finding strange discoveries around the world. But this time, a mysterious perfectly circular island was found on the delta of the Parana River near the Uruguay border. Although it looked like it's too good to be true because of its circular shape, no one thought much of it. After all, it was a mere island. But when it was discovered that the earliest image of the island was in 2003 and that it didn't exist beforehand, it raised some eyebrows. Yet, that wasn't the strangest thing about the island. To investigate further, documentary producer Sergio Nierspilerum used the time-lapse features on Google Earth, and that's when he discovered that the circular island was rotating in the body of water it's located in and turning on its own axis. A Kickstarter campaign was launched to fund a scientific expedition to explore the rotating island, which had been nicknamed the Eye, from a closer perspective. There was some speculation that aliens might have played a key role in the formation of the Eye, since there isn't a place on Earth that formed naturally and had the shape of a perfect circle, and people swore that it could simply be an alien base right under our nose. A missing man's remains. It's always a tragedy when a person goes missing without leaving a single trace behind. Consequently, their family and loved ones never get closure, and the case usually remains unsolved forever, with a few exceptions. The case of William Moult was a textbook case of a person going missing after a night out at a club. He disappeared on November 7, 1997, when he was just 40 years old. Moult was last seen getting into his car, and he even called his girlfriend to let her know that he would be home soon. However, Moult never made it home. The case remained unsolved for 22 long years, and Moult's family and friends never found out what truly happened to him. A previous resident of a neighborhood in Florida was exploring his old neighborhood on Google Earth when he zoomed in and spotted a strange object floating in the lake, an object that had a striking resemblance to a car. He called one of the residents who used a drone to confirm that there was a white car floating on the edge of the lake near his house. The authorities were immediately contacted, and when they arrived at the scene, they discovered a white sedan with its exterior heavily calcified as a result of remaining in the lake for 22 years. When they pulled the car from the lake, they found the skeletal remains of a person who was later identified as William Moult. Cradle of Humankind. Lee Berger is a paleoanthropologist who has his name etched in history for making one of the most important discoveries in recent history, a discovery that was made possible thanks to Google Earth. In March of 2008, Berger started the mission of finding fossils in Johannesburg, a city located in South Africa. But what he didn't know was that he would be discovering a new hominid species that existed 2 million years ago. He used Google Earth to map caves in the Cradle of Humankind, a World Heritage Site just outside of Johannesburg, so that the caves he previously identified would be shared with other people. In addition, he would also place known fossil sites in Google Earth. One day, Berger was rotating pictures that he had screenshotted from Google Earth, and he began to notice shadows of the caves he wasn't aware of before. They were often hidden in the lush landscapes and wild stinkwood trees, so those shadows helped him locate the caves. Later that year, Berger's son, 9-year-old Matthew, stumbled upon a bone in the area, which he later brought and showed to his father. Much to Berger's surprise, the bone was a part of a hominid shoulder bone. Berger and his team later found around 1,550 fossils that belonged to 15 individuals, and he coined the new species of humans, Homo naledi.
Decades ago, the world didn't have the same genetic genealogy and DNA tools that we have today, resulting in a myriad of cold cases that went unsolved. Luckily though, some of these cases garnered the attention of both law enforcement and internet sleuths who were able to connect the dots and capture the killers, despite the passing of several decades. John List. Murders that are committed by a family member or a close friend is something that's truly unimaginable and tugs at your heartstrings. So it might come as a surprise, as John List not only murdered his entire family in cold blood, but also filed for a social security number under a new name, traveled miles away from them, and continued to live as if nothing had happened while his family was buried 6 feet under. The police tried everything within their power to bring justice to List's mother, wife, and 3 children whom he killed in 1971 by trying to direct the attention of the public eye to the case and getting it featured on a TV. And that's when John Walsh decided to make it his life's mission to capture the cold-blooded killer. With the help of a forensic sculptor that was able to recreate how would John List look like in his 60s, Walsh revealed List's sculpture on the true crime TV show AMW. And it was within a short amount of time that List's neighbor, who then went by his new name Bob Clark, called the tip line to reveal that their neighbor fit the exact description of the killer. List was arrested at work and was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 5 terms of life imprisonment without parole. The disappearance of Etan Patz. The disappearance of Etan Patz was a case that went cold for 37 years. 37 years too long. It was 1979 and Etan Patz, only age 6 years old, was supposed to walk 2 blocks to the bus stop that was going to take him to school. Unfortunately, the young child never got on the bus. The authorities were alerted about Etan's disappearance, and more than 100 officers and bloodhounds embarked on a search for the boy. But it was to no avail. Despite the fact that the case was reopened in 2010 and law enforcement tried to solve it by excavating a basement that was near the apartment where Etan's family lived, it wasn't until 2012 that the case was solved when the murderer, 51-year-old Pedro Hernandez, confessed to killing him. Hernandez was found guilty, and he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Roy McCaleb. There's nothing quite as blood-boiling as hearing about a killer that, despite confessing of their heinous crime, to receive a punishment that's next to nothing. And this is what exactly happened in the case of Roy McCaleb. In 1985, Roy was shot and killed inside his home in Texas. His wife at the time, Carolyn Sue Krazan Wilson, claimed that a barefooted homeless man broke into their house, shot Roy in the head before running away from the crime scene. It was suspicious that Carolyn shed no tears throughout the investigation and funeral process, and even Roy's father was suspicious of her. They could do nothing with the lack of evidence. In 2008, after the case was reopened, Carolyn was arrested after confessing to murdering her husband. But due to her diagnosis of Alzheimer's and her overall state of health, the 71-year-old was sentenced to just 6 months in prison. Patricia Ann Green. Patricia Ann Green was a young woman whose life ended abruptly in 1987 when she was brutally murdered and her deceased body was found in a drainage ditch with bullets in her upper torso. Green's death remained unsolved for 39 years until the Richland County Sheriff's Office suddenly announced that the case was finally solved and closed. It was revealed that years after the murder, Green's clothes were sent to a forensic lab and they were able to match it to a man who was already serving several life sentences in prison for murders and other crimes. When the police presented the evidence to him, he confessed to murdering her, detailing that he had killed 2 people before killing Green simply for the sole enjoyment of killing people. Pamela Shelley. In 2001, a mother of 2, Pamela Shelley, had planned to run away with her children to flee her abusive boyfriend and come back to Arkansas. Unfortunately, her plan never panned out. Pamela sadly passed away on the way to the hospital as a result of a gunshot wound. They concluded that the shot was self-inflicted and ruled her death as a suicide. However, investigator Carl Bowen, who was working on the night of her death and responded to the incident, wasn't satisfied nor convinced, and he insisted on the case being reopened. Pamela's abusive boyfriend, Ronnie Joe Hendrick, pleaded guilty after Bowen had enough evidence to indict him, and he was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Angela Kleinsorge. A cold case that was solved too late. The case of Angela Kleinsorge wouldn't have been solved if it weren't for cutting-edge DNA science that helped investigators find the killer. 84-year-old Angela Kleinsorge was raped and brutally killed in her home in San Diego in 1992. Regular DNA testing proved to be of no help in her case as they couldn't match it with anyone in a statewide offender database, and the case went cold for 25 years. Thanks to family DNA typing and using DNA samples from the brother of the murderer, it was discovered that the person responsible for Angela's murder was her neighbor, Jeffrey Falls. But justice could not be served as Falls had been killed in a motorcycle crash years prior to this discovery at the age of 42. Ranya Rison. A murder case that was featured on the TV show America's Most Wanted, the murder of Ranya Rison, was one that was shrouded in mystery for years. Ranya was only 16 years old when she went missing, only for her dead body to be discovered a month later. Her death was ruled a homicide, but investigators didn't have a clue as to who could have killed her. More than 2 decades later, Ranya's former boyfriend, Jason Tibbs, was arrested and charged for her murder. It was revealed that the couple was having an argument when Tibbs, a very likable kid according to her sister, brutally strangled Ranya before disposing of her body in a pond. Maria Ridulph. Many of the cases in this video were solved as a result of the advancement of DNA tools and forensic science. But solving of the case of Maria Ridulph didn't even require DNA testing in order to be solved, as it was the killer's mother who revealed the truth to her daughter on her deathbed. The killer's half-sister, Janet Tessier, came forward to the police and detailed that her mother confessed to her about her lies to back up her son, Jack McCullough's alibi. So with her confession combined with the lack of an alibi for Jack McCullough, the evidence was enough to convict him of the murder of Maria Ridulph and sentencing him to life in prison. BTK Killer. The BTK Killer, named Dennis Radar, is a brutal man who went on a killing spree between the years of 1974 and 1991, killing more than 10 people during that time. When the killing stopped, the case went cold. Law enforcement wasn't sure of his whereabouts anymore, suspecting that he might have been dead or already in prison. That wasn't the case. In a similar manner to that of the famous Zodiac Killer, Dennis Radar was craving attention, so he decided to send 11 communications to newspapers and the local media to spruce up the case, not thinking that they would eventually lead to his arrest. He was eventually arrested in 2005 and pleaded guilty to the murders. Dennis is currently serving 10 consecutive life sentences in prison in Kansas. The Golden State Killer. The Golden State Killer case is one of the most well-known cold cases that puzzled law enforcement and the public alike. In the 1970s up until 1986, a man was terrorizing California, committing several murders, burglaries, and raping more than 45 women. But that wasn't enough for him. He'd later call his victims and threaten them on the phone. The Golden State Killer remained on the loose for 4 decades after committing his heinous crimes and managed to evade authorities. 47 years later, after further investigation that included DNA evidence and other methods, they concluded that the 72-year-old Joseph James D'Angelo, former police officer, was responsible for all of these crimes. Technically, UFOs refer to unidentified flying objects. However, we usually think of UFOs as alien spacecraft. And trust me, UFOs are not new. You might be shocked to know that humans have been describing UFOs for millennia, with depictions of objects that look like a disk. In fact, experts have found depictions of unusual atmospheric objects in the art and literature of ancient civilizations, from the Egyptians and the Sumerians to the Romans as well as the Greeks. When UFO sightings are investigated, many of them turn out to be the result of ordinary earthly phenomena like flares, rockets, or weather balloons, etc. However, sometimes experts just cannot explain a UFO sighting. Kenneth Arnold. It was the year 1974 when a pilot captured a picture of an unidentified object flying in Seattle and Washington. Let me tell you that a civilian pilot named Kenneth Arnold was flying his small aircraft near Mount Rainier in Washington on June 24, 1974. He claimed that he saw 9 objects flying fast at an estimated 1,700 miles per hour. He said that these objects were glowing blue and were flying in a V formation. Initially, Kenneth thought that these objects were some sort of new aircraft. After all, the Second World War had ended 2 years before this incident, and it was also the first year of the Cold War. However, the military later confirmed that there were no tests being conducted near Washington's Mount Rainier on June 24th of that year. The civilian pilot described the motion of the crafts as similar to a saucer if you skip it across the water. Soon, several other reports of a group of 9 UFOs cropped up across the region. It's worth noting that the government never offered a credible explanation for these mysterious sightings of flying objects, while the government simply claimed that Kenneth had seen a mirage or it was some sort of hallucination. I believe that Kenneth had actually seen a UFO. Think about it. We cannot be alone in this massive universe that appears to have no boundaries. What do you think? Tell us in the comments below. Roswell sighting. Kenneth was not the only person who had seen a UFO in 1974. Let me tell you that we are now talking about the mother of all UFO sightings. However, no object was actually observed flying in the Roswell incident. In fact, a rancher named William Mack Brazel discovered mysterious debris in one of his New Mexico pastures in 1947. He found metallic rods, chunks of plastic, and unusual papery scraps. He reported the wreckage to the authorities, and soldiers from nearby Roswell Army Air Force Base came to retrieve the mysterious materials. Several news reports claim that a flying saucer crashed in Roswell. However, military officials claimed it was just an ordinary weather balloon. Since then, conspiracy theorists have claimed that the wreckage was extraterrestrial. In fact, a man named Ray Santilli released a video back in the year 1995 of an alien dissection, purported to taken place after the incident. Although Ray later admitted in 2006 that it was actually a staged film, he still claimed that this film was based on actual footage. It turned out that the government was indeed covering something up. It was not a crash weather balloon, but part of a top-secret military endeavor known as Project Mogul. In this project, several high-altitude balloons were launched, carrying equipment used to detect Soviet nuclear tests. Although it appears that the mystery has been debunked, many people believe that the government is hiding something, and it was actually a UFO that crashed in Williams Ranch. You might also want to note that the town is now famous for its International UFO Museum and Research Center. Florence, Italy. Nearly 10,000 people had gathered to watch a match between two football clubs in Florence in Italy back in the year 1954. However, they stopped watching the game when a strange craft appeared. Witnesses say that the object was either cigar-shaped or egg-shaped, along with silvery white threads falling from the sky. Let me tell you that the University of Florence examined the samples and found calcium, silicon, boron, and magnesium. Although some people thought that the migrating spiders could be the answer to this strange sighting, the silk of these spiders is an organic compound and doesn't contain any of the elements that were found by the University of Florence during their investigation. Lubbock Lights. On August 25, 1951, 3 science professors were enjoying an evening outdoors in Lubbock. Well, the 3 professors from Texas Tech looked up and saw a semicircle of lights flying above them at a high speed. During the next few days, several reports flooded in from across town. In fact, a Texas Tech freshman named Carl Hart Jr. captured photographs of the Lubbock Lights phenomenon. These lights were published in newspapers across the country, as well as Life magazine. The Air Force investigated the events, and the officials claimed that the lights were actually birds reflecting luminescence from new street lamps in Lubbock. However, people who saw Lubbock lights refused to accept this explanation. They argue that the lights were flying too fast, and birds cannot fly at such high speeds. The lights above the New Jersey Turnpike. It was July 14, 2001, when a few motorists stopped alongside a highway in New Jersey to look toward the sky. For around 15 minutes after midnight, they witnessed a strange orange and yellow light in a V formation over the Arthur Kill Waterway between Carteret and New Jersey and Staten Island in New York. Let me tell you that Lieutenant Daniel Turan of Carteret PD was among the witnesses. Well, air traffic controllers denied that any military jets, space flights, or airplanes could have caused the mysterious lights. O'Hare International Airport saucer. On November 7, 2006, Flight 446 was getting ready to fly from O'Hare International Airport to Chicago to North Carolina when a United Airlines employee noticed a dark gray metallic craft hovering over Gate C-17. Surprisingly, 12 United Airlines employees, as well as a few people outside the airport, spotted that saucer-shaped craft that day. According to the witnesses, the object hovered for around 5 minutes before shooting upward. Fighter pilot encounter. This is one of the most intriguing UFO sightings. Back in the year 2004, two Navy FA-18F fighter jets encountered mysterious flying objects near San Diego. A report published by the New York Times claims that the fighter pilots encountered one mysterious flying object in the sky. The pilot said that the object was flying at high speeds and it was surrounded by a glowing halo. It's worth mentioning that they said that the object was rotating as it moved. According to audio from this incident, one of the pilots said there's a whole fleet of them. A Navy pilot named Commander David Fravor witnessed this bizarre event and later said in an interview that the object looked like a white Tic Tac, about the same size as a hornet, 40 feet long with no wings. Fravor told the Washington Post that the object accelerated faster than he had ever seen anything in his life as his plane approached it. Well, the Navy guy is convinced that the source of this object was extraterrestrial. Sighting by retired astronaut. In the end, we have a retired astronaut claiming that he saw a UFO. Generally, some of the most reputable and credible sightings come from pilots and members of the military. After all, these are all the same people who are in the skies all day long. Back in the year 2013, a man who is a former commercial pilot, fighter pilot, as well as astronaut, said that he noticed an orange glowing fireball while he was looking at the sky with his family in Athens, in Texas. He reported this incident to the National UFO Reporting Center and said, "When I looked up into the sky, I saw a fairly large orange glowing orb moving rapidly overhead, right about 90 degrees of elevation." He also said that 3 similar flying objects followed the same flight path after a few minutes, and 3 minutes later, 2 more objects were witnessed by the former astronaut. He said that these objects gave off no sound and appeared to glow from atmospheric heating. Although his family tried to record these mysterious objects using their smartphones, the dark was difficult to decipher. The man said they moved much faster than orbital satellites or airplanes, but much slower than meteors, did not change brightness as a meteor would upon entering the atmosphere. I have no explanation for what we saw. There are entire worlds buried under thousands of feet of snow, and we're just starting to uncover them. Graveyard of dinosaurs, perfectly preserved humans, new species, or should we say ancient species, and more are waiting in the frozen ice, waiting to be found. The Maiden. Upon first glance, you may not think there's something that strange about this mummy, but this 13-year-old girl was found over 20,000 feet above sea level on the edge of a volcano along with 2 children. She was frozen in ice and preserved to the point that not only is every detail about her clear, but you can still see the lice in her braided hair. It's believed that the Maiden died more than 500 years ago as a ritual sacrifice in the Andes Mountains, left with the 2 children to succumb to the freezing cold as an offering to the gods. She was found to be drunk on corn liquor, likely to put her to sleep. Her mouth still had fragments of coca leaves, which the Inca were known to chew to lessen the effects of altitude sickness. Message in a bottle. Is there anything more terrifying more than a mysterious item found frozen? A mysterious item that foretells the terrifying damage of climate change. The existence of this message in a bottle dates back to a geologist by the name of Paul T. Walker, who made it his life's mission to prove glaciers were melting. To prove his point, he placed a note in a bottle and buried it beneath rocks near a glacier in 1959. What did the note say? It had instructions to measure the distance from where the bottle was found to the edge of the glacier. The bottle, encased in ice, was discovered in 2013 by 2 researchers who followed the instructions. Walker was right. The glacier has retreated over 200 feet, effectively proving that global warming is real. Ancient deadly virus. There's no shortage of frozen objects, but have you ever thought that you can find an apocalypse-inducing virus trapped in the ice? As the ice melts around the world, scientists have found new viruses that were frozen in time. One of the prominent is one that was found in a few hundred feet under the tundra of Siberia. The virus, more than 30,000 years old, was still active. There's no known cure for it. It's earned the nickname of the Pathos virus due to its size, said to be the largest virus in the world. Woolly rhino. The last thing hunters traveling through Siberia in 2014 expected to find was a woolly baby rhino. They had originally thought the creature was a dead reindeer, but as they approached it, they found out that it resembled more of a preserved prehistoric rhino. The rhino was named Sasha after the hunter who found it. It's one of the only woolly rhinos in history to be discovered. See, unlike woolly mammoths, who also lived in the Ice Age, woolly rhino remains are super rare to find. They're so rare that there's not a lot that we know about them. However, Sasha allowed us some insight. An analysis of its teeth revealed that it was about 7 months old when it died, and Sasha is big. Too big for even 7 months old. It measured about 5 feet long and stood about 2.5 feet tall. If you take modern rhinos in Africa for comparison, they don't reach that size until 18 months of age. Lake Vostok, a frozen lake filled with alien-like bacteria? That qualifies as one of the strangest things found frozen in the ice. Lake Vostok's discovery dates back to 2012 when Russian scientists drilled through over 2 miles of ice and stumbled upon it. Buried deep beneath the deadly cold landscape of Antarctica was the continent's biggest subglacial lake. It's been completely isolated for millions of years to the point that the bacteria in it was completely unfamiliar. A dinosaur graveyard. One of the most bizarre things to be found in ice is an entire dinosaur graveyard. This massive area is from the early Cretaceous. It's located in the Torres del Paine National Park in Chile. Imagine it, 46 complete specimens of Ichthyosaurus that date back from 100 to 150 million years. The word Ichthyosaurus basically means fish lizards. They were a group of large, fast-swimming marine reptiles that lived during the Mesozoic era 245 million to 90 million years ago. The ice preserved them to the point that they still have soft tissues and embryos. The largest one is over 16 feet long. What could have possibly buried them in the ice like this? Scientists believe that it was some pretty large catastrophe that buried them first in sediment, then in the glacier before the 46 dinosaurs were caught in an avalanche. A tunic from AD 230. Global warming strikes again. This time, as Norway's glaciers melted, archaeologists have had their hands full with more frozen artifacts than they could handle. This case takes us to the mountains of Oppland County, where artifacts from the Iron Age have been uncovered. Once upon a time, this area was used as a path to move back and forth over the mountains and was full of farms and moving livestock. Most of the items that have been found are horseshoes and arrowheads, but a few objects have been found to be more interesting. In 2011, a team of researchers from the University of Oslo and the Norwegian University of Science and Technology stumbled upon a tunic that dates back between AD 230 and AD 390. To make things even more interesting, the tunic was all wadded up and was covered in horse poop, which is equally ancient. Mountain range as large as the Alps. Seeing a several thousand-year-old tunic is something some people may shrug at. They may even think finding old animal bones normal. But what about an entire mountain range? Feast your eyes on the subglacial Gamburtsev mountain range, which is trapped under 2,000 feet of ice. This amazing discovery was uncovered by Soviet geophysicist Grigory Gamburtsev. The range is about 750 miles long and the mountains are thought to be about 8,900 feet high, which makes them the same size as the Alps. A study found Gamburtsev to be incredibly old, first forming around 1 billion years ago, and to think it was hiding in the snow all this time. Otzi the Iceman. In another case of humans being discovered in the ice, meet Otzi the Iceman. Discovered in 1991 in the Ötztal Alps, it's believed that Otzi is as old as 3000 BC. This finding is unparalleled, as Otzi's body allowed the world peerless insight on how ancient civilizations. Otzi was killed by an arrow to the brain and after having his head bashed several times with a rock. Before his violent death, Otzi boasted of having some serious ink, covered with tattoos that are thought to be connected to acupuncture. He was frozen with an axe, which is from Tuscany, hundreds of miles from where he died. Because of how eerily intact he was, scientists were able to determine he had advanced gum disease, gallstones, hardened arteries, high levels of arsenic in his system, and damage from frostbite. There are actually some legends surrounding Otzi the Iceman. He's believed to have a curse surrounding him. said that the team who removed him from his icy grave suffered from violent deaths. Baby mammoth. Sometime over 48,000 years ago, a baby mammoth roamed the world. In 2007, we found his frozen body perfectly intact. The baby mammoth was given the name Lyuba. It was found by a reindeer hunter who was out on a frozen peninsula in Russia. It was eerie intact, skin, trunk, and even eyes. Immediately upon discovering Lyuba, the hunter knew he had stumbled upon a gold mine. A friend advised him to contact a museum director. Excited to share his findings, the hunter led experts back to the mammoth body, only to find it missing. Turns out that his friend wasn't the only one he told about the body, and a cousin of the hunter decided to steal and sell the remains to make a profit. Eventually, the authorities were able to track down the buyer, and luckily, the mammoth was still intact. Ever since the camera was created, humans have captured several pictures that we cannot explain. These pictures are disturbing and interesting at the same time. And although the advancement in technology has helped us discover the truth behind some of these photographs, there are still some photographs that cannot be explained. The Hook Island Monster. It's no doubt that we get to see some of the most bizarre, terrifying, and gigantic creatures in the water. While this might be the case with Robert Leseric, Robert, his family, and one of his friends named Hank Dejon stayed on the Hook Island for around 3 months back in the year 1964. Here it's worth mentioning that this island is off the coast of Queensland in Australia. On December 12th of that year, Robert, Hank, and Robert's family were crossing Stonehaven Bay on the island. That's when they noticed something odd in the water. Robert says that his wife noticed a strange creature in the water. The creature was long, tadpole-like, and they captured a lot of photographs of this creature. The picture appearing on your screen right now is one of those photographs. Robert says that the creature was at least 30 feet long. Well, that's a really massive creature, right? You might be surprised to know that instead of running away, Robert and Hank decided to venture into the film and record a video of that creature. What would you do if you come across such a huge monster? When the two friends entered the water, they realized that the monster was even bigger than they had previously thought. So they started recording a video of that monster. Within a few minutes, the monster opened its mouth and swam away. Robert and Hank were recording it on film, and when they checked the film later, there was no footage of the monster. However, the photographs were pretty clear, and they were even published in a magazine. In fact, the picture is now one of the most popular and unexplained photographs of a cryptid. Although Robert and his friend were convinced that it was actually a monster, many people think it was just a plastic bag used by the American Navy for experimenting with towing fuel. On the other hand, some say it would have been a deflated skyhook balloon that was covered in weeds. What do you think? Was it really a monster? Tara Calico's disappearance. In April 1988, a 9-year-old boy named Michael Henley traveled from Milan, New Mexico to the Oso Ridge near the Zuni Mountains. The little boy went missing and was never found. And then in September of that year, a 19-year-old girl named Tara Calico left her house in Belen, New Mexico. She didn't return. Both of these disappearances didn't appear to be connected until June 15, 1989, when a woman in Florida found a Polaroid photograph of 2 young people bound with duct tape over their mouths. The lady called the police. 2 months later, Tara and Michael's parents discovered the news of this mysterious photograph. They believe that the children in this photograph were Michael and Tara. However, the body of Michael was found near the place where he went missing. This discovery didn't change the mind of Tara's mom, who believed that the girl in this photograph was Tara until she died in 2006. Grandpa's Ghost. Back in the year 1998, Denise Russell and her family went out for a picnic. Her grandmother, who was 94 years old at the time, needed to be placed in a nursing home at the time because her mind was deteriorating. Denise says that her family loved their grandmother, so the first week was difficult for all of them. Eventually, the family decided to go for a picnic on August 17 of that year. The photograph you currently seen in the video was captured on that day by Denise's sister. Well, it appears to be a normal photo of an old lady with her husband behind her, right? Wrong. This old man is not supposed to be in the photograph. Why? Well, he had already died. Shocking, right? So the family had this photograph developed and they did not pay much attention to this old man. Nearly 2 years later, Denise's grandmother died in April 2000. On Christmas of that year, Denise's sister was just looking through some loose photographs. She came across this photo. She noticed the old man standing behind her grandmother. She asked Denise about the old man in the photo. Surprisingly, Denise said that this man looked like their grandfather. Here it is worth mentioning that their grandfather had already died back in August 1984, several years before the photograph was captured. The whole family believes that the deceased husband of Denise's grandmother was there, watching his wife in her difficult times. What do you think of this photograph? Do you also believe that the man in the photograph is actually Denise's grandfather? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section below. The Sodder Fire. Although this photograph may look like an ordinary picture, there's a pretty complicated story behind this picture. Back in 1945, George and Jenny Sodder and 9 of their children celebrated Christmas Eve in their house near Fayetteville in West Virginia. George had a 10th son who was serving in the Army at the time. At around 1 a.m., a fire broke out in the house. George, Jenny, and 4 children got out of the house while 5 children did not make it out. And when George tried to drive his truck in order to get help, the truck did not start. Unfortunately, the fire department was not notified and they arrived at 8 a.m. The surprising part of the story, that the bodies of these 5 children were not found. Later, many people claimed to see the children after the fire. The picture in this video was received by Jenny in 1968. She received an envelope with a Kentucky postmark and no return address. On the back of the picture, it was written, "Louise Sodder, I love brother Frankie." Their son Luis was 9 years old at the time of the fire, so where did the children go that night? Why did they never return? And who sent this photo to Jenny? These questions are still unanswered. Amityville Ghost. We've heard about many haunted houses in the United States, and one of the most popular haunted houses is located at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville in New York. Let me tell you that the Dutch colonial house was the place where a 23-year-old man named Ronald DeFeo shot and murdered all of the 6 members of his own family on November 13, 1974. Ronald was later arrested, convicted, and he was given 6 concurrent life sentences. Next, the house welcomed in 2 new owners. George and his family, including Kathy Lutz, and 3 children moved into their new home in December 1975. The family claimed that the spooky things were happening inside the house. For instance, the family claimed that George used to wake up at 3:15 every morning for no apparent reason. Scary part? Well, this was the approximate time when DeFeo murdered his own family. On the other hand, Kathy claimed that she was embraced by a ghostly presence. One of their kids even became friends with an imaginary friend named Jody. This imaginary friend looked like a black pig and his eyes were glowing red. Eventually, the family was forced to flee in fear after staying in the house for just 28 days. Then on March 6, 1976, demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren visited the haunted home. They set up time-lapse infrared cameras inside the house and captured this scary photograph. In 1979, George appeared on the Merv Griffith show. That was when this photograph was made public. Many people think that the child in this picture is the ghost of Ronald's youngest son named John Matthew. It's worth noting that John was 9 years old at the time. This photograph is indeed frightening. As Jurassic Park put it, scientists are so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. There's no limit to scientists' imagination. The ethics of their experiment are controversial, and whether the goal benefits the greater good or not, that's up to you. And in some cases, the world's governments to decide. Zombie dog. Dogs are supposed to be man's best friend, but they won't if they're trying to eat your brain. In 1940, a motion picture made by Soviet scientists revealed their success in some truly odd experiments. Their research focused on the resuscitation of clinically dead organisms. They were able to make the heart of a canine, isolated from a body, beat as if it were a living organism. But the research didn't get creepy until the separate head of a dog was shown. The Soviet scientists were able to keep the head alive, supplying it with oxygenated blood. These dogs were kept alive for several hours, and they weren't just breathing, they wiggled their ears in response to noise and even licked their mouths. Believe it or not, these weren't the only zombie dogs. In 2005, American scientists created an entire pack of them by flushing all the blood from the dogs' bodies and replacing it with oxygen and sugar-filled saline. 3 hours later, the dogs were resurrected, but they had permanent damage beyond repair. Sheep-goat chimera. What you're looking at isn't a sheep-goat hybrid, which is made when a goat and a sheep mate. The sheep-goat chimera was made in a lab by combining the embryos of the two animals. If you get tired of calling it a sheep-goat chimera, then you can call it GEEP, as it came to be officially known. Made by the Institute of Animal Physiology in Cambridge, the first successful chimera creature was made in 1984, with the scientists reporting that the GEEP was a mosaic of goat and sheep cells and tissues. Not everyone shared the same enthusiasm. Time magazine would later describe the GEEP as a zookeeper's prank, a goat dressed in a sweater of Angora. Frankenfish. Frankenfish is often the term that gets thrown around when it comes to genetically modified fish, and the fast-growing salmon is no exception. The fast-growing salmon is not only dramatically bigger than your average salmon, but it can grow to market size in half the time as the conventional Atlantic salmon, meaning it can be about 16 to 18 months versus 32 to 36 months. How did scientists make this mysterious creature? They combined a growth hormone gene from the fast-growing Chinook salmon with a fragment of DNA from the ocean pout. The result? The gene and the DNA acted as an on switch that allows the salmon to grow at any given point in the year instead of seasonally, like farmed or wild salmon. Mbuku lizard. At least the fast-growing frankenfish has a purpose, but there's no practical reason why scientists tinkered and came up with this creature. Take a look at the genetically modified Mbuku lizard. It's believed that the lizard is a descendant of the pterodactyl dinosaur, which lost its ability to soar into the skies millions of years ago. Scientists were able to tap into the lizard's dormant gene and make 6 of these flying Mbuki. In fear of them crossbreeding with regular Mbuku, they're kept separate. Featherless chicken. The featherless chicken, or the naked chicken as it's sometimes called, is a bizarre breed of chicken that was made by 20 years of research. Led by Avigdor Kahaner at the genetics faculty of the Rehovot Agronomy Institute, Tel Aviv, Israel. This poor monstrosity's purpose was to be a cheaper, more eco-friendly, and more convenient chicken than the average clucking feathered chicken. There's a cost to this experiment. The chickens became more prone to suffering from sunburns, parasites, and mosquito bites. On the upside, they showed a faster growth rate, lower fat content, and their lack of feathers makes them able to adapt better in hot climates. Genetically modified cows. In 2007, one team of scientists in Argentina succeeded in developing a genetically modified cow. They were able to modify the cow so that it could produce insulin in its milk. And shockingly enough, they revealed that the procedure to make these cows and extract the insulin from the milk cost 30% less than the current methods used. They also estimated that 25 of these insulin-producing cows could provide enough insulin for all 1.5 million diabetics in Argentina. Ear mouse. The ear mouse is one of the strangest, most grotesque science experiments of all time. It's also probably the most successful human-animal hybrid in history. Headed by Charles A. Vacani, a lab was able to plant an ear made by biodegradable materials on the back of a mouse's body. The ear, with cartilage and flesh and all, was slowly absorbed into the body, and boom! They had a never-seen-before human-mouse hybrid. The purpose of this experiment is that the ear would later be surgically removed and grafted onto someone. However, Vacani's work was shut down after he ran out of funding, just before he could reach human trials. Pig human. Left to his own devices, scientist Hieromistus Nakachi would create an entire zoo of human and animal hybrids. His ultimate goal is noble in theory: create a farm of animals whose hearts and organs can be eventually harvested for humans. Nakachi's experiments drove him out of Japan, where it's illegal to grow animal embryos that contained human cells beyond 14 days. But he left Japan and headed straight to the US, where he was granted $1.4 million to continue his twisted experiments. In 2017, he succeeded in creating 186 embryos that created pig-human hybrids. One of the embryos stood out for being the most human, containing 0.01% human DNA. Akauchi was only allowed to let the embryos develop for 28 days before he destroyed them. Rabbit Man. This is one creature that was destroyed a few days just from horrifically the experiment succeeded. Meet the Rabbit Man, a creature that was more human than a rabbit. This happened in 2003. A group of scientists in Shanghai grew the first successful human-animal hybrid in a laboratory dish. What they did was fuse human cells in rabbit eggs, resulting in a creature the Earth had never seen before. After a few days, they found that the majority of the DNA of the creature inside the eggs was human. Regulations forced them to destroy the eggs after a few days and harvest them for stem cells. Human-chimpanzee hybrid. If the government hadn't shut down this inhuman experiment, then we might have had a Planet of the Apes situation. Everyone knows that humans and chimpanzees are freakishly related. Like 95% of our DNA sequence is related to them. So it makes sense for scientists to latch on the likelihood of a human-chimpanzee hybrid being successful. In 1967, a team of scientists from Shenyang were able to do the unfathomable. They successfully impregnated a female chimpanzee with human sperm. With the first human-chimpanzee hybrid in their lab, their ambitions grew too high. The team's goal was to create a highly intelligent, evolved chimpanzee with a bigger brain and a wider mouth. What for, do you ask? They wanted the hybrid to speak. If the experiment had finished, the hybrid would have been used as a slave whose job is to drive carts and herd sheep. The endgame was sending this hybrid to space, but before the female chimpanzee could give birth to this monstrosity, the Cultural Revolution and the People's Republic of China came in the way. The scientists were forced to abandon their lab. The female died of neglect. By the time she died, it's believed that she was 3 months pregnant.